You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
It's not true. That's impossible.
100 years before the rise of the Empire, it is a time of peace. The Jedi Order and the Galactic Republic have prospered for centuries without war. But in the dark corners of the galaxy, a powerful few learn to use a force in secret. One of them, a lone assassin, risks discovery to seek revenge. Oh my god, that's the opening titles for the Acolyte. And this is Making Tracks Reaction Chat. And joining me for the whole of this series, as always, he is my partner in crime. He is, I'd say, my Jedi Padawan, but to be fair, he's really the Jedi Master. It's Mark Newbold. Mark, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
Very well, thanks, dude. Very well. Really excited, and I've been chomping at the bit to speak to you about the Acolyte. I mean, it's been out for a couple of days, which is fine. Unfortunately, workload from my side for once has been so ridiculous that I haven't had a chance to kind of sit down and press a big red record button with you. Otherwise, we would have done this probably the same days as the first episode came out. And on that note, I have only seen this once. So when I saw these episodes was at the premiere that we spoke about on Making Tracks in the last episode. So I haven't actually seen these episodes for like a week. So, it's my memory and my recollection may be a little bit hazy, but that actually might not necessarily be a bad thing. Might be a good thing. It just means I'm probably going to have to excuse my inaccuracy when it comes to characters' names and misremembering stuff. So let's start off then. General thoughts and feelings. And actually, before we get too far, I'm sure by now, if you've listened to an episode of Reaction Chats, you'll know that we kind of trample over the plot in non-linear kind of fashion. So that does mean that this is kind of your spoiler warning. So if you haven't watched The Acolyte, then really go and watch it. And if you've kind of already drawn the line in the sand to say that you're not watching The Acolyte for whatever reason, well, then you're a dick and go and watch it. But let's start off with, your general thoughts and feelings. And also what have you been seeing online in terms of the general fan and just like viewer kind of reaction to this new series?
Well, I'll kick off with my thoughts first off. I'm thrilled to be in a brand new era. It's great to be in a new time period of Star Wars. Obviously, a century, give or take, before Phantom Menace. So it's kind of different. It's touching on what we've seen in High Republic in the books and the comics and Young Jedi Adventures as well, and then stepping forward its way, obviously, before the prequel trilogy. So it's very much in its own era. I like the confidence. I like the look of it. I like the feel of it. I like the way it's directed. I basically really, really liked it. I mean, without rabbiting on about every little element, including catering, which I'm sure was fantastic. I just liked all of it. I just liked the vibe of it. I like the character interactions as well. So already it feels fairly well set. And I'll give an example. I'll give a really odd example of a film that people bash, but I think's brilliant. Independence Day. I'm not comparing the two projects whatsoever, but Independence Day did a really, really good job, I think, of detailing a lot of characters in a really short amount of time. And so you kind of got a feeling for all of them as they went down like Skittles until you got everybody left at the end. The second film didn't need to do that in the same way, but the first film does it brilliantly. This film, or this series, I should say, has got lots of characters. You're introduced to them quickly. Almost immediately, you get the vibe of what Jecki and Yord are about, what their relationship is. You get a real good sense for Master Sol very, very quickly. Venestra the same. So there's a lot of characters that you really do. They nail who they are very, very quickly. I like that. I'm straight in with them now. When you've got the obvious, and again, like you said, we're going to be bouncing all over the plot, but when you meet Oshi or Osha, and then you meet May, and you realise fairly quickly that they're not the same person. Spoiler alert. That how well that's played by the actress, by Amandla. there's things where they draw some things out really quickly, hold some things back really well. So all of that I liked. Your second point, online reaction to it, ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Review bombing, no time for it. If you don't like it, great, fine. There's a million things on Netflix, Amazon, Paramount, anything else you want to look at. The review bombing that's been happening, especially on Rotten Tomatoes, is just insane. 91% with critics, 27% with the viewers. That makes all the sense. It just delivered the biggest single day on Disney Plus this year. So makes a mockery of the Rotten Tomatoes. And that's not Rotten Tomatoes' fault. I mean, they can only aggregate the figures the way they do. So yeah, it's not getting a very fair shake in some quarters, but I think the more perceptive Star Wars fans, let's put it that way, the ones that want to give it a chance, are going to reap the rewards.
I think so. I mean, and also there's that whole thing of like the practicality of it. I kind of have always viewed, like, even IMDb's reviews, Matt, which actually is kind of, it's sitting around, both episodes sitting around like 6.2 out of 10, which actually is not bad. And it may sound bad, but actually the review kind of like metrics for IMDb tends to be a little bit more critical, I think, than sometimes Rotten Tomatoes. But all of these, I personally feel are slightly have more historical usage than they do like present day usage. Because if a show does really well, then you hear about it from word of mouth, from your friends, from, you know, your social media bubble and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so therefore, just, you know, doing a review, all that is basically doing is just highlighting just, you know, the sad, you know, users who are kind of like feeling that they have to kind of, you know, be negative for the sake of, like, you know, I guess basically trying to push their own agenda. Now, that in mind, if out of 100 reviews, let's say, there's 10 critical reviews that are constructively critical but still negative, that's different, because that's actually where you can have a conversation, and that's where you can have discourse. But if it's just like, oh, it's just woke nonsense and, you know, it's Kathleen Kennedy, blah, 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 well, then, you know, we certainly don't have time of this podcast or the news network to really talk, you know, to really worry about it. So with that in mind, we're not really going to dwell on it too much. But you do bring up one point, actually. So one of the things that we were talked about what the Acolyte series was going to be, was going to be a murder mystery. Now, so I'm thinking now, because in the first episode, or if not definitely by the end of the second episode, we've kind of solved the mystery, at least on the very kind of obvious level.
Yeah.
Which kind of, so you kind of go, oh, okay, because in my mind, and this is just where my mind went from listening to Leslie Headland and Kathleen Kennedy and all that do the, like, you know, the promotional circuit and stuff. I was thinking, well, this was going to be like Star Wars Law and Order. In my mind, I was like, this is going to be like the Jedi being the cops in Law and Order and going to solve a mystery. You know, kind of like in the intergalactic galaxy, you know, whatever, the justice system is defended by two equally yet important groups: the Jedi who investigate felonies and the Sith who basically try and either malign it or something like that. You know,
gotcha. Yeah.
So that was my kind of slight kind of thing, and I know part of what we're seeing is almost I think quite a big nod, and again, I think something that may have been mentioned in the promotional stuff about Kill Bill, because in Kill Bill, there's not only is it where they're talking about it from the combat perspective and, like, you know, the characterization and storytelling through combat, but also the kind of a premise of Kill Bill is it's a revenge story.
Yeah.
It's about the bride. Basically, she's got a list of people and she's just going through and striking them off. And that's what we've seen so far with May. She's gone through and she's killed Carrie-Anne Moss's character, Indara, and that floaty, bald-headed Jedi dude who had a really big, bad receding hairline, which even makes me think that he was older than he looked, or actually, but I thought he looked quite young. And then on that same list, you've got Jedi Master Sol and Kalnaka. So immediately we've kind of got, I guess, a sense of where this story is potentially going. But at the same time, because we had this big misdirect in the first, 5 minutes, where we're kind of watching this battle, we're watching Indara kind of fight May and then dies, you then kind of realize, or it's kind of almost at that point suggested, was that some kind of dream? Was that actually Osha kind of actually dreaming?
Yeah.
And then, so we've got that big misdirect. So I'm kind of thinking that whatever the big mystery is, really the murders is actually just kind of like the background to actually the bigger story, which is what we're going to, I guess, explore deeper in the next 6 episodes.
Hi, this is Danielle from the Acolyte, and you're listening to Fanta Tracks.
Yeah, it's interesting because, they did sort of lay it out like a mystery thing, and you've just really nailed the Kill Bill element. The other thing they mentioned was Frozen. And to me, Osha feels more like Anna in, not Elsa, but Anna in Frozen, the sort of the forgotten second sister that doesn't get any attention and is sort of living that quiet. She's a mech. She's working on the Trade Federation ship. You see her doing that. My goodness, flames in space, whatever next. And, and then she's, go on.
I was going to say, but we've seen those in Phantom Menace,
Of course,
for one.
Of course,
but also, I mean, who's to say like that wasn't a chemical fire? And we know like chemical fires can burn underwater and without oxygen. So like whatever. I mean, it's up there with like the whole kind of like, magnetic bombs in space and Last Jedi. It's like just
totally
deal with it and just enjoy it for what it is. It's Star Wars. I mean, it's science fantasy, not science fact, people.
Exactly that.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So she's that girl who's kind of, I mean, we know she was a Padawan. She knows she trained under Sol. She knows Yord. She knows other people. Indara knows. They all know her. She's known at the temple. And it wasn't for her. And we don't know why it wasn't for her. So she had a destiny that in the same way that Leia put her lightsaber down, you could say Osha decided this isn't for me. And there was probably a triggering point for that.
Yeah.
But we don't know what that is yet. So there's enough mystery in there. But there's also enough about her that she almost feels like a forgotten jewel almost because Sol reacts to her so well in a very positive way. He wants to believe her, very quickly understands the situation with May. Yeah,
and I think that partly really is indicative of Sol's character. And I think because this is, coming back to the revenge plot element, it feels like those 4 different Jedi have probably in some respect maybe dealt with whatever tragedy happened with Osha and May's family. Yeah. Because we kind of see those flashbacks of like the place being on fire. Now, kind of makes you kind of think, well, did the Jedi do that? Or did they, so was it actually an action by the Jedi that caused that? Or was it their inaction by the Jedi that caused that? Which actually is sometimes equally, if not more damaging to know, but you could do something, but you didn't. Yeah. And you kind of go, well, actually, then you've got these 4 different Jedi who kind of on one level or another are dealing with it differently. You've got, I think the obvious one is Cal Naka, it looks like he's kind of almost gone into exile in a slight Yoda kind of analog kind of way of like, I'm going to go and exile myself. And you've got Torbin, that's his name, the bald guy.
That's it.
He seems to be kind of like, he's kind of like become very introspective. And I really like that big nod because that whole kind of forced meditation thing is something that they reference in like Darth Vader comic from like Kevin Scott. Yeah. Which is really cool. So that's kind of cool. And that's actually, again, that's a little payoff. That isn't actually a High Republic payoff. That's actually just a payoff for, the loyal fans who've been reading the Stars comics, which is really fun. Yeah. Whether or not you remember, or if you had to read like Sanders Guide to pick that up is another matter.
The Barash vow, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, something like that, which, again, so you could say, well, is that like some kind of vow of penance, really, And then you've got Sol, who I feel, because he's got that attachment to Osha still. Now, is that his guilt? So basically there's an atonement, but he feels like he needs to help her to kind of like try and help make the wrongs right or something. Could it be that maybe they thought May was dead or they had to kill May or something like that? Maybe, because we kind of get that slight, I almost feel foreshadowing in the kids' Jedi training where you've got the one girl who's kind of like, fire, when we're all kind of like talking about what the force is and stuff. Yeah. She's just fire. Now, whether or not that is just her picking up on some kind of latent kind of like tremor in the force to do with these 2 other ladies in the galaxy. Yeah. Or maybe she's actually, that's how they maybe start to pick out bad apples before it gets too late. And, you can go, it's that whole kind of thing of like, what do you see on this kind of like this card? And, one way you read it, you're normal. The other way you read it, you're a serial killer. And it's kind of like that. So it could be something like that, some kind of like Jedi pre-screening, because you kind of think they test all these Jedi younglings to see if they're force sensitive. But we haven't discussed whether or not then they retest them to make sure that they actually stay on the light path.
Yes.
So could it be something like that? So that makes me kind of think, well, maybe could it be that actually Osha did an Ahsoka and walked away from the Jedi Order because maybe she saw something they weren't, what they were built to be, as it were, the whole kind of hero complex where you never meet your heroes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so maybe she walked away from it and put her lightsaber down willingly. Maybe they even kicked her out because she was older. She was an older.
That is mentioned, yeah.
So again, so there's lots of little things that I think that, you can kind of start to be a little bit more perceptive about what where the show's going to be. But, it's only 2 episodes in, so it's really difficult to kind of know. And, I'm sure even when we get to episode 6 or 7, we're still going to be kind of maybe getting like curveballs left, right, and center, or at least that's what I hope anyway.
Yeah, it feels like that sort of show. It definitely feels like that sort of show.
Yeah,
and then, like you say, it's quite linear now at this point where you know who's doing the killing, you know who needs to be killed, very Kill Bill, as you said, and you know the Jedi are kind of piecing it together, and then realise who's doing it, but who's next and why. Well, they now know the list. So all of that makes sense.
Yeah.
The team that did what they did in relation to a younger Osha and May. So that makes sense. But I think one thing that really stood out to me was, and a lot of people have, again, as a criticism, have sort of said, oh, that's not how Jedi act. Oh, that's not how this happens. And that's not how that happens. And you think it's a century before. We know the Force does this, it ebbs and flows, and there's balance and all the other elements that Filoni went into such great detail in the Clone Wars, and other books and comics have picked up on as well. And you see it, especially you see it in the sequel trilogy as well. So there's moments where the Force is closer to the Jedi or closer to the Sith or whoever is the receptor for that power at that particular time. You look at Indara, the control she's got. You look at Sol when Sol is fighting May in the second episode, the street fight. Basically, the movement, the skill, just the way it's laid out, it's fantastic. Way beyond, you would say, what you've kind of seen already down the line. I really enjoyed that, but there's one thing that really stuck out to me. Yord has really taken off as a character this week on social media. The whole hashtag Yord Horde thing has really taken off. He's you can see he's kind of an endearing character. He's kind of a bit proud. He's presentation. He's proud of his presentation. You see him ironing his robes and all that stuff. That little scene.
Let's face it. It's at least my Instagram feed. It seems to be, and I hate to be generalist about it. It seems to be a lot of women. Ironically, and what I'm actually seeing is the same like meme kind of that some of us guys may have shared about Ahsoka about when we're really watching the Ahsoka for the plot, and then there's like just photos of like Hera's ass,
Hera's bum, yeah.
This is kind of like, this is all ironically, this is like the next iteration of that, which is quite funny.
Yeah, I think it's for some of the guys as well. Let's be honest. It's a fair mix. But he's a character that they've, like I say, they've sketched him out really well already. Already, you get a sense of who he is. But that sequence when he goes on the ship at the beginning, the Trade Federation ship, to first see Osha, as we now realise, with his Padawan, and there's a little bit of banter and repartee between the two of them, but fairly quickly, even before then, he goes on the bridge, talks to the Nemoidian, doesn't really even think about it, just uses the Force, does the mind trick, really without any hesitation, gets the information that he wants. You see Sol do it to the prisoner that gets out of the escape pod when they're back on Coruscant, when they've recaptured the prisoners, but they haven't got haven't got Osha. And Sol, who we look at and go, he's kind of the Qui-Gon of this era. That's the connection most people make. He's a good guy. But you watch Qui-Gon in Phantom Menace, he's doing this all the time. And Sol is the same. So there's they're not shy of using their powers, even though it's supposed to be all for good, all for the betterment of society and all of that. There's an arrogance about these Jedi in this era that maybe really, when you look forward, as obviously Palpatine's a Sith, so he's got all the arrogance in the world. He's the best player of poker ever in the Star Wars galaxy. But Qui-Gon's the guy that's doing that in that particular time period. Even though you think of him as the ultimate, the ultimate good guy.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it comes down to the big question of like who polices the police. right?
Yeah.
On some level,
Yeah.
and also then again in an overarching kind of story kind of narrative, really from the High Republic era, is Nihil and also the Path of the Open Hand, who are very much like the Jedi are inherently bad. They're corrupting the Force by what they're doing. So there's, and you kind of see that. And I suppose that's the thing. It's very easy, isn't it? It's like, I'll put it into a real world perspective, shall we say. You see a pack of cookies and you have one cookie and it's like, that's right, doesn't matter. It's only the one. And then 10 minutes later, the whole fucking pack of Oreos are gone.
Tell me.
Scrunching the packet up in the bin and so that.
And then the missus tells you off.
Exactly. Well, actually, she laughs at you, goes, "You're not in a calorie deficit anymore." But there you go. But so there's these things, and that's the things that actually, if you go back, you can go, actually, it's not just that they're doing something different or in this era, but this is preceding what we see in Phantom Menace, like you said.
Yeah.
And I guess it's because we see it as like an altruistic kind of way of dealing with it. Because let's be fair, every time that somebody's like, I'm not going to tell anybody anything, and you're thinking, well, you're a Jedi, I'm just going to pull it out you,
Yeah.
But nobody's having that conversation as to is the act of doing something like that inherently dark side, or is it because it's in defense of the greater good, therefore keeps it on the light side? So.
But do you think with the Force? That's a great point. That's a deeper point. We could talk for hours about that. Yeah. But do you think the Force as an entity would go, we'll let that slide because he was kind of doing it for the right reasons, or it's a power that's tapped, isn't it? The exactly. Force is a power that's tapped, and I suppose we've learned, and even certainly in Star Wars, there's theologians and there's people who study this to like the craziest degree. Way back when they first discovered it, hopefully we'll see it in the Mangold film, and right ahead to when we rejoin Rey, whenever that film happens, and she's picking up teachings, and you keep having these sort of Jedi dark ages when the knowledge and the skill is lost and they've got to pick it up again. Is the Force just a bucket full of whatever that you could just siphon off and use as and when, or is it more conscious than we think? Because George did mention, and I never really knew whether he meant it or whether he was just ribbing us, that he wanted to do a film on the micro level about the midichlorians. So is it more sentient than we think?
Well, I suppose it comes back down to that whole symbiosis kind of principle, isn't it? And if there's midichlorians in everybody, it's like, are they sentient? Are they aware? And then if so, what happens? Is it the will of the dark side user, for example, corrupting the midichlorians in themselves to then use a Force? So, they might be, as it were, like receptors for the Force, but then obviously whether or not they have their own kind of sense of like light and bad
morality or whatever.
Morality, exactly. That's the word I was trying to find. Yeah, it is an interesting point, and like you said, that could be something that could be explored. The whole morality of a Force and why and how you use it, it's become, you start to call into question, because then you start to think, well, it's almost a bit like how the way that May's approaching, like trying to kill these Jedi, and how her leader is this Sith guy. We assume he's a Sith guy, but it's a dark side user. He's got a red lightsaber. Yeah. So that's probably not necessarily, he didn't just ignite it just because, for fun. There's a reason for it. But it's a bit like it's the way that May is trying to kind of like taunt them into using their own like lightsabers, basically by giving into their rage and their anger. And you kind of think, well, that's possibly what's happening here. Is that like it's the control, the subconscious control, but behind that. So it's an interesting thing. And they talked about it a lot in the High Republic. You look at Elzar Mann and the kind of the different sides to him and how things kind of like he was very much dabbling on the dark side at one point and stuff. So it's a bigger ongoing subject, and I think also this is why I really like this new Star Wars era, is because it can kind of start to define the Force a little bit on its own terms without having to necessarily completely align with what we've had before, because it is, like as you said, 100 years before the rise of the Empire. So therefore, mindsets can change. Like even like if we come down to the internal like standard operating procedures of a Jedi Order can change. I mean, the last time we see Vanessa Rowe in the High Republic, she's like I said, a Jedi wayfinder. So she's basically been told she can go off by herself and explore the galaxy and explore what the Force means to her, the living Force, like Qui-Gon. And then now we kind of see her actually in the series, and it's 100 years later, and she's towing the line. She's like almost the voice for the council, or at least like that small area of the council. And so you think, well, so what's happened there? We send her off one way, and then at some point she then realised that actually she needs to be part of the council, or the council has to recall her or something. So it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure that's like a 10 series book, job that somebody's going to have, like Justina Ireland, or somebody's going to write that series or something, So
yeah. Well, you came up with the title, Morality of the Force. So there's your title for a series of books investigating that.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
One of the things that really stood out to me as well was the design. We go back to Coruscant. We see a familiar but slightly different Coruscant, which is interesting. Yep. You see vehicles. You see a vehicle that kind of looks like a Vector, pretty much is, but not quite. Yeah. So there's like a later iteration, you guess. So you're seeing these different vehicles. Trade Federation aren't in the donuts we used to. They're in something different. So there's some really nice design.
Well, the Trade Federation's kind of like, it feels like it's almost in like just a large freighter. And so you kind of think, so this is just like the infancy of the Trade Federation. Are they still kind of like fairly small, or how big are they and stuff like that? And also, like, is it like the Gonk droid is smaller, so it doesn't have, I guess, the same amount of like capacity as like the ones we see in A New Hope. So I have liked actually how because I suppose what's quite refreshing is that barring I can think of maybe one or two characters, there shouldn't really be any big like cameo type character cameos, because everybody's like not been born yet.
Well, if you read The Living Force, John Jackson Miller's book, which is fantastic by the way, well worth a read, or the audio book with Mark Thompson, which is fantastic, you do realise that some, obviously Yoda, and Hu Yang has been around for centuries, millennia. So there's certain characters, if they turn up later, then you wouldn't be surprised at all. No, exactly. But there are members on the council. They're talking about a mission that was, like 80 years before, whatever it was, I can't quite remember. And a lot of the Jedi were around for that. So there are probably on the council that we know from Phantom Menace, there's probably half of them you could say could be around for this this period.
So, I mean, hopefully that...
Maybe not on the council.
Maybe, exactly. You'd think probably most of those would be, I mean, if we see like a younger Ki-Adi Mundi, for example, that'd be quite cool.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's not a cameo if it's a character. Because I mean, this is the thing. Actually, I had a conversation with somebody at work who watched it and was like, "Oh, I was expecting like Carrie-Anne Moss to be in the whole thing. Didn't realize she was basically just going to be a cameo at the start and then she's going to die." I go, well, I don't necessarily think that's probably going to happen. I think she's probably going to be like coming back in, I guess, flashbacks, whatever, some kind of vehicle, because that was a big casting announcement and a big name. So it would be pointless to put her in that role, and that, as much as that opening scene was awesome, I mean, cut back to me in like 8 weeks time when we get to like the final episode of The Acolyte, and if she's not, well then I'll be disappointed, but still hopeful at that point. But what my point was is like there's lots of these little kind of design touchstones which are kind of familiar, but also they're not like redesigned in a way that makes them feel like it's such a big iterative jump between like the Acolyte to even like the Phantom Menace. And there were some really cool things. I really quite liked how that prison ship's freighter kind of autopilot was
the droids,
the chairs.
I love that design.
I was like, that's really cool, and something really clever. And yet they had a really kind of big clunky kind of like protocol kind of droid,
like a Battlestar Galactica type thing, like a Cylon.
It totally looked like a Cylon. Like it literally is like if a Cylon had mated with TC-14 or something. It was,
yeah.
Because there was hints of like potentially what a protocol droid is, but like it wasn't so on the nose that you're like, oh, that's exactly it. And I really liked how they've done that and how they've approached that. There
was a mention, actually, you say about that. There was a mention when the Padawan comes in with Yord to speak to Osha, and she says, Metnek, dangerous job. Usually astromechs do that. Or maybe it's Jecki says it later on, whichever way. I think it might be Jecki later on, actually, that says it. But either way, they mention astromechs. And I think it's determined a long way back that at the time of Phantom Menace, 3PO was about 200 years old. I think that's been there since A New Hope, to be honest. But obviously, he was built and then trashed and then rebuilt. So there's probably various versions of 3PO going back. So you kind of think that maybe his design goes back quite a way. But R2, I think even R2 at that point was probably around about 80 years old. So, you're getting to the start of R2's operational life there or thereabouts. My point is that you go beyond the original trilogy into the sequel trilogy, and BB-8's an astromech. I think we might have talked about this before. So you would imagine, and you've seen different versions of astromechs, that's kind of a like a model, but it's upgraded, like an X-Wing's upgraded or a TIE Fighter's upgraded. Or an iPhone, exactly that. So it'd be interesting in this era if there was an astromech that we get to see something working on the hull of a ship, let's say, like they were doing at the start of the episode, and you see what this era's version of an astromech looks like.
Yeah, as long as we don't have maybe somebody build an R2. I don't think I need to see an R2 origin story in any series or any film, to be fair. I think he can just kind of just bumble along. I don't
just be. Yeah.
I don't think we need to see that, Let's not uncover that stone. So with respects to, like, I guess for general aesthetic, one thing that I picked up on as a costumer was obviously I quite liked how they've kind of, it looks like for different temples, like Jedi, it looks like the different Jedi temples have slightly different Jedi tunics and that.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I thought was quite cool. So you kind of got like the Coruscant ones are, more, they feel slightly more High Republic-esque in respect that they've got the white cream kind of like cloaks, which I need to get one. They're awesome,
Same. I was thinking that.
Clean for long, but I was just like, and it's about time, really, that they had like a cool cloak, because the Jedi robes that you kind of get from Phantom Menace and the prequel trilogy onwards, they're a bit big and a bit clumsy. These ones felt a bit more elegant, so I'm down for that.
Yeah, I might have found my cosplay, Mark, just so you know.
There you go, job done. Yeah, I could probably put you in touch with somebody who might be able to make that. So, and so I liked how they kind of the colors were kind of similar. Then when we go to the other planet, to the other temple and that with Torb and that, then they seem to be more in kind of browns and stuff. I mean, this could be a misread, and it's just based on those two episodes, and it might be actually, maybe there might be something more a bit like uniforms or something. I don't know.
I think it's a really good observation, because in this era, I mean, we see it in the books, we see it in, again, Living Force just mentioned it, that there were Jedi temples all around the galaxy, and they've sort of dropped away, and it's all been centralized back to Coruscant, essentially. And just speaking for me briefly, I used to do fan fiction like 20, 30 plus years ago. And one of the stories that we did in our little region of the galaxy was there was a local Jedi temple in our sector, and there was a council for that sector. And it always felt wrong. We just did it because we're just doing our own stuff. It doesn't matter. It's just our own stuff. It doesn't. And now, weirdly, as the years have gone on, it's turned out to be absolutely on the nose. So I'm personally quite pleased about that. But yeah, I like the thought that there are these temples, and I think you're right. Now you're saying it, I'm thinking, well, yeah, when they have the face off with May, and forgive me, I haven't got the planet names in my head yet, so it'll come. But when they're on the planet later where Master Torben is poisoned by May and passes, they're much darker brown, much more like sort of Obi-Wan's sort of A New Hope darker brown. Whereas, as you say, the more ornate cream and gold, like you see on the covers of the High Republic books and comics, feels like more of a Coruscant thing, which would make sense, wouldn't it? It's the interior, so.
Well, you kind of think that maybe it's it could kind of come down to like the kind of work that those Jedi are doing. So it could be like I mean, I know for example, like Luke, if you read, I think it's Last Jedi, novelization about, the reason why Luke's in the white is because actually that is a ceremonial Jedi tunic, and actually he was
Right.
going to go and commit suicide, but it's kind of like, it's kind of like not really mentioned about again after that.
No.
Apparently that was, so that was the plan. So and actually in some respects that's kind of what Torben's kind of done. He's kind of asked for atonement. He's asked kind of like, for forgiveness, and then he's kind of, I guess, what is it? The Japanese term, I guess, is seppuku, isn't it? Where they basically, it's like a honorable, like suicide. Normally, when you cut, I think you cut from left to right or something across the chest and through the gut. So I can't remember exactly, but it's something like that. And again, it's like that's the only way that he's happy to kind of move on and stuff. Because I don't get the sense that May would really have like on a 1-to-1 straight fight with a Jedi. I mean, she's clever. Let's not.
She's sneaky.
She's sneaky. Well, because like in some respects, what she's doing, she's using the weaknesses against them. Like with Indara, like she's putting other people at risk to cause a distraction, to then kind of get in. So it's that, and it's a whole slight kind of, like when she uses the dust to kind of like escape at the end of the second episode. That's a very ninja kind of thing where they kind of throw their smoke bombs and stuff and what have you. So I think that's really cool. You kind of, and I suppose, if she's been tasked with having to kill a Jedi without using any weapons, and I don't know, again, if this is to do with the kind of quest that Emperor Palpatine sent Vader on, where basically he has to go and kill a Jedi so he can then bleed lightsaber crystal. But I don't know if it's to do with that or if it's just purely just like a trial, as it were. Like, you can't be a Sith apprentice unless you can kill a Jedi, because otherwise there's no hope for you to kind of continue the Sith line, as it were. I found all that kind of really interesting. And I think as we go, we're just going to hopefully see more and more of that and actually understand the reasons behind why that is for task that she's been set.
I'm Derek Arnold, and I get my news from Fantha Tracks.
On that planet, you see Kamir, Manny Jacinto's character, comes across straight away as kind of loose and laid back, and he's the helpful, handy guy. He's sort of been told, we've been told he's a smuggler. He mentions he works for the Hutts. It seems, and again, a lot of people online are picking up on this, and I certainly did, it seems there's definitely more to him than meets the eye. There's more to him than he's letting on. There's a moment where they have to basically get out of Dodge. When you see at the end of the second episode, they head towards where Kelnaka is, where May kind of goes at him with those blades, and he stops her, and there's a look on her face like, how the hell's he stopping me? She looks confused that, how's he stopping me doing this? And he's definitely in that moment in control, and then he eases back into the kind of slightly goofy off-center character that we sort of meet at the beginning when he's sort of asleep in the bar. What did you make of him? Do you think it's a misdirect to think that he's the, waggle the air quotes, Phantom Menace, or do you think that he may be the Sith apprentice of the big bad and she's an acolyte in that sense? How do you think this might stack up? Or is it just a complete misdirect and he's just a resourceful kind of guy?
No, I kind of thought there's definitely something more to him than that. And I kind of maybe thought, maybe he's there kind of like as just to keep an eye on her, almost like just to kind of like report back a little bit. And, because he talks about that kind of stuff about Sith acolytes and stuff, and like he knows full well that she needs to kill a Jedi without weapon and stuff.
He basically says the first line of the Sith code, doesn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
The whole piece is a lie thing.
Yeah, so that makes me think that if he maybe, I suppose it all depends upon how true. I mean, we assume that if this is a Sith and they are sticking to like the rule of two, then potentially he is the apprentice. But then my take on the Sith would be that you kill any kind of potential competition.
Yeah.
So either he's there because he's like, right, so he's just watching her just to see if potentially she could be his apprentice, and that then once she kind of kills her Jedi, gets a lightsaber, they can take on the Sith Master, and therefore that's then the next generation of the Sith kind of gates. Or actually, we're not dealing with the Sith. We're going to deal with like a whole new kind of sect of dark side Force users, which in my thinking would be slightly more interesting, because I mean, it's a whole thing of like, I kind of feel like the more we kind of tie ourselves to like identities and organizations and characters and stuff from the Skywalker saga, the more it's going to feel slightly tied to it. Where this can probably be a little bit more open, and it could be like a path of the open hand, kind of like
exactly
kind of like dark force, kind of like wielding kind of tribe or club, sect, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because certainly Phase 2 introduced more of these kind of options, we call it that. And I think nothing that's happening in the Acolyte is by accident, in the sense that what they've laid down in the High Republic felt like they were laying the ground out for what they could do in the Acolyte. So if it was Sith, fine, because we know the Sith have to start from somewhere, and they've been on the down low, as we think, for basically 1,000 years. That was kind of the tone that you were given from Phantom Menace and all the stuff that went around it.
Yeah, that's what Commando said, wasn't it?
Well, he said they've been extinct for a millennia.
Yeah.
But I think by the same token, you've got a Jedi Council. And even though I think it's a dozen, if I remember, on the council, that there's probably 2 or 3 at the top that have got their own little, circle, and they really know. I mean, any operation, there's always guys at the top that know what's going on that the rest of them don't, but think they do. So maybe it's the Sith, but I agree with you. If it's the Sith, great, because it's the Sith. Hey, why wouldn't we want to see more of that? It's interesting, but if it is another organization, another faction or group or whatever that are accessing the Force, that would be really interesting, because the reason I say that, and not just because it's something different, but because potentially season 1, or maybe if it goes into a second season and the story sort of rolls over, and Ahsoka season 1 didn't wrap anything up. So why would you think, Acolyte season 1's going to wrap anything up? Maybe you will see the extinction, the complete final, wiping out a Jedi Order 66, if you like, of this, this other faction that seems to be doing things for nefarious means.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting thought, really. My hope is that this season, I think they've even said there will be a conclusion to this season and the story, at least from the main story for this season, and I think that's right. I think in some respects, I think where Ahsoka kind of slightly went wrong, without kind of digressing, is because it wasn't particularly closed-ended, and I think they maybe should have closed it, because it feels slightly half-baked. However, again, if you've got strong foundations for another series, and there's going to be plenty that we can pick out, even in these first 2 episodes that would run throughout the whole of this, this first season into the rest of the series. So it's going to be interesting. And how many episodes is it? Is it just 1 next week that we get, or 2?
It's 1 now, 1 till the end of the season. So
1 till the end.
8 in total. Yeah.
Awesome. So hopefully by then, we'll be able to kind of. Hopefully by then I'll get a chance to rewatch a bloody thing. That'd
be nice.
And I can realise how far off I was on my recollections.
No, I'm going to say, considering you've only seen it once, your recollections are pretty spot on, mate.
Thank you very much. We try. So, but I suppose it's been helpful, because I've, there's been a lot of discourse and chat online, so it's reminded me of stuff, and it's weird. It was one of those kind of shows that I kind of watched, and at the time I kind of took it all in, but didn't really kind of I guess you could say, pass it until later on, and then it wasn't until the drive home. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense, and and because whilst I was watching it, I wasn't quite the whole kind of May Oshi kind of backstory. I mean, it was very clear as day that they were there's 2 sisters, and I think there'd been comments and maybe even stuff alluded to this online, so they weren't making any bones that there wasn't going to be some kind of family drama in the series, but the whole kind of trying to work out what it was that happened, that kind of is a bit kind of confusing, but the more I thought about it, the more it kind of slotted into place and that. And I mean, I'm hoping that actually, we see something that the Jedi have done, which is kind of, I guess, make us question the motivations of this current sect of Jedi. So it'll be interesting, for the next few weeks. And I'm really looking forward to chatting to you more often for the next 6 weeks anyway, beyond our regular episodes of Making Tracks. For this slightly delayed episode of Reaction Chats for the Acolyte, I think that's all we have got time for. So thank you very much for listening.
Visit fanthatracks.com or be sure to comment, like and share on our social media feeds at Fanthatracks. Send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Temple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Anna O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, on Facebook, YouTube and Twitch. And check out our Fanthatracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Phantom from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks. And remember, Fanthatracks.com, our social media feeds, Fanthatracks TV and Fanthatracks Radio are absolutely so no Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, Kickstarter or Indiegogo required to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
Enjoy the rest of your Star Wars week and catch us at the next episode of Making Tracks.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.